Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Audit Committee meeting. And just to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded. And in commencing the meeting, I acknowledge that this meeting is being held on Whyalla land, and in my case, Narunga land, and we give thanks for the use of this meeting. We have an apology from the Mayor, and I do pass on my condolences to her. And I think we, the rest of the committee, are present, and I'm sure those staff who are present will be noted in the minutes. Moving on to the declaration of members' conflicts of interest. So I just remind members of their requirement to declare a conflict of interest in any items in the agenda. Do members expect to have to declare an interest in any of the items on the agenda? No, that is good. So we'll move on to the minutes for the previous meetings. So the first minutes there are the minutes held on Tuesday, the 8th of February. Could I have someone move those, please? So Councillor Simpson's moving. I think.
Second.
Mr. Cocklebar. So we'll just wait a second. Okay, so all those in favour of the confirmation of those minutes, please raise your hand. Against, that is carried. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of April. Could I have someone move those, please? Councillor Stupas moved. Councillor Simpson seconded. All those in favour? Those in favour of that? And against, that is carried. Thank you very much. Okay. I'll just go to business arising. Don't know if the staff have any comments, Beth?
Yes, if I can, through the chair. Item 2 on the business arising as it relates to risk profile, whilst the status says refer to item 6.1.1, we were originally going to be coming to this audit committee meeting with an update of our framework and implementation plan, etc. We have further deferred that to our July meeting, but in update to the committee, what I can report is that the risk policy and risk framework and risk appetite statements have all been reviewed and updated in line with updates that the scheme and the Local Government Association has made to that suite of documentation. We are also currently in the process of reviewing the risk profile, both strategic and operational, and the risk action plan from the Local Government Risk Services has also been updated. While that hasn't actually come to the audit committee as yet, the reason being is that whilst that work and review work has been done, we do want to socialise that with the executive management team and the leadership group across the organisation prior to actually coming through to the audit committee, which we haven't yet had the opportunity to do. So that will happen over the coming weeks, and that suite of documents will come to the July audit committee meeting.
Okay, thank you for that update. Any comments? Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was also going to refer to Grant in terms of the work program, with the work program as it relates to the interim report coming through from the auditors.
Yep, thanks, Kathy. So normally we would bring the interim audit report to the May meeting, but just with the timing of our interim audit, they weren't able to quite get that ready. So that will come to the July meeting. So that will still be, the meeting before you obviously see the final end of year report from the auditors, and from their closing interview when they visited on site, they did say that there was nothing of great concern, for leading to qualification, anything like that was shown. So it'll just be similar to last year, I imagine, with some items for improvement for areas that they've focused on more this year as they've get more in depth. So yeah, that'll come to the July meeting.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Do any members of the committee have any questions or comments? Work program. There's also the external review work plan. So I noticed the review of the EPLGA charter is nearly complete. So
yes,
should see that at the so that's going to the next council meeting.
Yes.
That is good. Okay, thank you very much for that. So we'll move on to item 6.1.1, the budget review, third quarter review. Grant, I'm assuming you want to say a few comments?
Yes, thanks, Alan. So I'll take the report as read, but just highlighting, obviously one of the big items was that the federal government have decided to pay 3/4 of the financial assistance grants in advance this year, and that this year they've already done it. So they often leave it till sort of the last week of June to make an announcement and decision. But this year they've actually already announced it and paid it, I guess because they're about to go into caretaker mode. So yes, obviously that has impacted our operating position, but that is obviously the adjusted operating position takes out that timing issue. So that's the big item in there. There are obviously a lot of other items that sort of mainly offset the airport operating position is the one thing we couldn't offset across the overall council budget, just with passenger number reduction, mainly because of the restrictions that came in December. So we were sort of on track to hit close to probably our projected start of the year passenger numbers, but with the sort of January, February, March quarter of passenger numbers that declined quite a lot. We're seeing recovery now. The April numbers don't seem too bad. But yeah, so we're able to offset that. And then as normal in the third quarter budget review, we've sort of updated our project timings. So there's a decent amount of carry forward of projects into the next year. Either ones that have, in the tender or early delivery process and will continue into next year, or ones where delivery has actually been pushed out for whatever reasons. So some due to not being able to get any tender responses, for instance, for a stormwater project. For a various number of reasons. So this year's capital program was quite large and probably not able to be fully, it was expected that some of those projects would push out. So we've identified them in the third quarter review. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Members, any questions on the report? Yes, Councillor Stupas.
On page 28 at item 5, you had $550,000 worth of work on the rec centre. My understanding from the last council meeting that we had, that a figure of about 759,000 was quoted. So I'm not understanding what the 550 is.
Yep, happy to answer that. So for this year, we actually had a budget of 600,000 for renewal works general sort of renewal works at the Leisure Centre, and we had about 150,000 to replace the slide specifically, but that was going to be pending the master plan being adopted and what the decision was there. So in the second quarter review, we'd already pushed out the replacement of the slide, so 150 had already been deferred. So we're deferring 550 of the 600. We are spending a bit of upfront detailed design money right now, and there's about an extra, there's actually another 150 or so next year that was like a stage 2 of that project that was in the next year's budget. So there is around sort of the 800,000 mark, 750 to 800 that will be available next year.
Okay. And on page 27, item 2, it said that we had an increase in workers' comp rebate of 100,000. I'm assuming that the rebate is income, not expense.
That is correct, but we've been told, and the model financial statements basically mean that you have to recognise it as a reduction in your expense.
Yeah,
so
that's what I thought you were trying to do.
Council's previously recognised it as sort of other income or something like that, but there was a change a couple of years ago, and so now we recognise it as a reduction in the expenditure in line with other councils.
Hold the microphone for a bit longer. How's our rate recovery going for the current year? How's our previous year's bad debt? How are we going in clawing those back?
Yep, so we are sort of slowly progressing along the Section 184 process, but that comes with lots of little steps and processes. So we haven't actually got to the point of sale yet, but we are moving along that path. But the start of the Section 184 process, we did get a few resolutions on a small number of those properties, but unfortunately a large number of them did not. Overall, I haven't seen anything that suggests that our sort of outstanding rates there is going up. It's sort of fairly steady over time. As I said, we did resolve a couple of large ones, but hopefully as we move that Section 184 process along, that'll improve a few of them. Yeah.
I just sense that our current recovery of current year's council rates is a lot slower than it was the previous year. And as we now head into May, June, I'm just wondering what our bad debt situation is going to look like.
Yeah, no, from looking at the figures, I don't think it's much higher than it would have been in previous years. It's a bit hard to, it actually probably looks a bit better than last year even actually, because last year was the year where our rates were getting paid later because of the COVID delay that we did. But yeah, overall, in terms of, overall quarterly late payment of rates, it's about right for the month just after the rates were due. They do catch up over the next month or two because we have a lot of people that pay weekly or fortnightly, and so they might not quite make the due date, but they will be up to date or close to up to date by the end of the financial year. So I haven't seen anything that sort of suggests that we're increasing that figure or spiking in that area.
Slightly lower this year.
Someone said slightly lower.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I was just talking to Sandra. I was just having a look in the back end there. So as I said, I think it looks a little bit lower actually, the outstanding. But as I said, that's due to the fact that our quarterly payment was due a little bit earlier this year. Last year was a little bit out of whack with the with COVID.
That's fine. Thanks, Grant.
Thank you. Grant, I just have a couple of questions. So just to confirm that with the financial assistance grants, we're getting paid 5 quarters in this financial year. Is that correct?
That's correct. So yes, where in previous years they've always, or for the last number of years, they've kept it at 2 quarters in advance. So we've always got 1 year's worth in every year. So yes, because they've now decided to go an extra quarter in advance this year, we are getting, yes, basically the equivalent of 5 quarters. And it could actually be a little bit higher than that. There's a bit of skewing of the amounts this year because of the way they do the calculations. I won't get into the details of that because it's a bit annoying. But yeah, it's possible that we've actually got more than 5 quarters worth, and that will adjust out next year.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Just on page 28.7, looking at the decrease in amounts received for new or upgraded assets. just the $934,000. I didn't think that grants from the LRCIP were shown as capital income.
Yep, happy to answer that one. So what we did, I think during the first quarter budget review when we looked at it, what I explained to the audit committee is until we know the timing of them, I've just got them sitting in capital because bringing them, as we recognise them, they will be recognised as an operating grant. But because they skew our results so much and are confusing to explain, I didn't want to bring the budget across to operating until we knew which year we would receive them in.
Yep.
So basically, we've worked out we're not actually going to get that allocation this year. We'll likely get it very early in the next financial year, and then we'll bring it across to operating and explain the impact on our operating result.
Yeah.
But it was easier than impacting this year's result and then pulling it back out and moving it to next year, basically.
No, that makes sense. No, that's good. And I did notice the adjustments to the future budget years. Yeah, so they are consistent with what was discussed at the last meeting in terms of adjustments to future years' budgets. So, yeah, they're not just related to any changes in this year's this budget review, which confused me at first, but yep, I was able to work that out. Any other questions from the committee? No? Well, there is a recommendation there that we recommend to council the adoption of the review and that the annual business plan and long-term financial plan be amended. Could I have someone to move that, please? Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stupas. All those in favour of those recommendations? Oh, against? That is carried. Okay, move on to Treasury Management Policy Review. Grant, do you want to speak to that?
Yep, just very quickly. So this policy was just due for review after 2 years. The policy is operating very well, I think. It's a pretty contemporary sort of treasury management position that this council takes. So the only update was one that was almost flagged, I think, when we actually originally adopted this, and the discussion we had with the audit committee was that we probably want to have a slightly higher target for fixed, so keeping it fixed at about 50%, so evenly split between fixed and variable. Obviously, when we first adopted this policy, we were sort of only just moving into a debt position and setting, we sort of set a low fixed rate to phase that in. But now that this has been operating for a couple of years, I think setting that target at the 50% makes sense, with a range of sort of 30 to 70 to allow for cash flow changes throughout the year.
Grant, can I just ask a question? You mentioned about the target range, which has now changed 30 to 70. How do you interpret that? What does that mean?
Oh, it's so each month we actually, in the monthly budget report that goes to council, we sort of say what at that month end, what percentage of loans were fixed. So what we'll do at the start of the year, at the moment we've tended to fix in July. We've worked out our fixing, and so we look at our cash flow projections, build in, some assumptions around what we might carry forward in terms of capital, which can affect that. But yeah, basically we'll pick a number where we can be within around the 50% mark. But that 30 to 70 allows for our sort of the cycle of rate payments, that sort of thing. Because obviously the way our cash flow works, we'll have one big month of cash inflows, and then we'll have 2 months where we tend to have cash outflows, and that's what will happen over the year. So that 30 to 70 is to allow for the fact that at any point during the year, our cash flow will go up and down. but we'll aim for around the 50%.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from committee? Look, I think that's a very reasonable policy, and certainly with the increased level of borrowings, it makes sense to make a slight adjustment to those target rates, and they're probably because if you had less borrowings, it might actually be harder to meet that percentage. But yeah, makes sense to me. So I'd be happy to support those changes. Councillor Stupas, are you moving that, or do you have a question? Oh, you are on mute.
Yeah, I had a question, Alan, sorry. Probably not part of the Treasury management policy itself, but at what point does the council stop borrowing? Is there some sort of trigger mechanism that's got to be instigated in the policy that says, you know, you should no longer borrow any more funds?
Yep, I'm happy to answer that question. So as the policy or the report sort of outlines, the borrowing level of council is actually set by its budget and its adopted budget. And actually a change to the Local Government Act in the reform is that council will actually have to have an extra resolution in the adoption of its budget now, where it sets the maximum borrowings for the year. That's how, so there was some wording in the reform that said that councils can't borrow above an agreed level. And so the LGFA, who all councils borrow through, have interpreted that as they will want to see a resolution that sets the maximum borrowings for the year. So that'll be adopted in line with the budget at the budget adoption. And then obviously if the budget review was to increase your required borrowings, we'll actually need an updated resolution to that effect. And obviously as well, the other thing that impacts it is what is our borrowing capacity. So currently the report that goes to council, the monthly budget report, shows that, you know, we have a maximum borrowing capacity right now of 26 million. So if that agreed level of borrowings was above 26 million in line with the budget, we would actually need to also look to arrange an extra facility and go through that process. Council will obviously have a target net financial liabilities ratio, and that is probably the guiding thing of where borrowings should max out. But obviously that's up for discussion with council, and they can obviously always decide to increase that target or go above their target range. But that's probably the main thing guiding council on their borrowings, is what their net financial liabilities ratio is at. And ours is not particularly high. We've set a target of 80% because basically our operating ratio is the main thing that limits this council, not our borrowings per se. So hopefully that answered your question, sorry.
It does, Grant, thanks.
Councillor Simpson?
Just to follow up on that, you're saying that we can borrow up to 80% of our income towards loans, future loans.
That's correct. Yep. So that's what the net financial liabilities ratio measures. So yes, our target is to have maximum borrowings at the moment of 80% of annual income.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a recommendation there. Is there anyone who would like to move that? Councillor Simpson, and seconded by Mr. Kokebar. All those in favour? Those against? That is carried. Thank you very much. Move to the quarterly procurement report. And I'd just like to thank staff for putting in that extra column as well in the report. Do Is there any comments by staff on that report?
No, I'll just take this one as read, but happy to answer any questions.
Any comments or questions by the committee? Councillor Simpson?
Just a comment that I know it's hard to overcome, but our out-of-town expenditure is so much higher than local expenditure. It's just a bit, we try to balance it out a bit better if we can in the future.
Yep, so happy to.
On availability of contractors and etc. But it's one of those things that gets frowned upon by us being out of town.
Yep. So and one of the hard things with that is that often we'll for very large capital projects, the head contractor will often be, so that'll measure, you know, who we've actually engaged to do the works. But they will have like as part of the assessment process, they probably will have agreed to have subcontracted some as much work as possible locally, but it's very hard to measure in a report like this. You know, basically we measure who the main contractor is, and so often we do a lot of our spend does happen locally, but that's the small spend that for operational type things. And the thing that throws the report out is that often our very large tenders go to, you know, large companies that are able to tender for those sorts of works that aren't based locally.
Certainly the figures for March, there's a very large increase in non-local, and I assume that's because of the work on the airport primarily. Yeah.
So that of that 7 million, 6 million would have been the engagement of, or so would have been the engagement of that airport airside works.
Okay. I just had a question about the project management for the airside works. I was just surprised that there wasn't the opportunity to undertake a tender process. Is there a reason that there wasn't a time to undertake a tender process for that job?
Grant may well add to this, and if the committee requires further information, we'll take the question on notice in terms of the team that is managing the airport airside works project. But the project management, we became aware once we had actually let the works to the lead contractor. With changing over of airport managers, it was all at around that same time, and it became very apparent to us that we would need a external project management and quality assurance services for this particular project, whereas previously we felt that that would be able to be handled within existing resources. However, given the technical nature of the work, we did believe that it was imperative to have a person solely focused on the project management and quality assurance works for that project, rather than it being part of either our current airport manager's role or our current capital works manager person within the organisation. Given we'd already engaged the lead contractor and the timing of the works, we needed to go out quickly and achieve somebody who had experience in managing major projects relating to airports.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you. Okay, if there are no more questions from the committee, we have a recommendation that the committee receive and note the procurement quarterly report. Councillor Stupas has moved it and Councillor Simpson has seconded it. So I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour? And against, that is carried. Okay, so that will bring us to item 7, which is a confidential item. And so for those, just to let the public know that the committee will now be about to consider a resolution to
Keep going a little bit further.
for this for the rest of, or
Yep.
for the next item, be considered in confidence. So we won't be broadcasting or recording, making that part of the meeting available to the public. So there is a recommendation there that we go into confidence pursuant to section 90 of the Local Government Act, and I assume that we've got all the staff members correctly recorded there. And can I have someone move that? Councillor Stupas, you moving that? Councillor Simpson? So all those in favour of that recommendation? Okay, thank you. That moves us to confidence. Okay, we're just waiting for, oh, sorry, forgot to click my buttons there. I think we're just waiting for Peter. Here he comes. Okay, welcome everybody. So we come to the end of the meeting. Are there any other comments or questions that people have? No. So if there are none, I thank everyone for their participation, and I close this meeting at 2:20 p.m. and remind people that the next meeting's on the 18th of July.